This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 509, a Wordpresser at DrupalCon. On today's show, we're talking about DrupalCon, WordPress, and what a WordPress guy can learn at a Drupal event with our guest, Chris Reynolds. We'll also cover Shortcode as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guest today is Chris Reynolds. Chris is a developer advocate at Pantheon with a background in development at WordPress agencies like Human Made and Web Dev Studios. They maintain open source plugins, have authored Pluralsight courses, and have been active in the WordPress community since 2011. Outside of work, they're usually planning a D&D session, cheering on their local pro women's soccer team, or hunting for the best vegan food in town. Welcome back to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me back.
I'm Nick Laughlin, founder at Lane Development, and today my co-hosts are JD Leonard, freelance Drupal architect and developer at Modern Biz. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
And joining us for the full show today, Martin Anderson Klutz, senior solutions engineer at Acquia.
Hello, internet friends.
And now to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to Martin, a senior solutions engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules and recipes of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, Nick. Have you ever wanted your Drupal site to support WordPress-style shortcodes, macros to be used within content? There's a module for that. It's called Shortcode, and it was created in September of 2010 by Dennis Sabo of Tag 1, and it has a 2.0.3 version available, which supports Drupal 9.3, 10, and 11. It is actively maintained, has security and test coverage, and it has 30 open issues, 3 of which are bugs against the current branch, which is pretty impressive considering it's officially in use by 13,260 sites, according to Drupal.org, although approximately 70% of those are D7 sites. Now, for anyone not familiar with WordPress shortcodes, the documentation describes them as macros, and most often they are used for inserting elements into content, such as image galleries, videos, playlists, and more. Shortcodes can also wrap content, however, and it's possible to nest shortcodes as well. Drupal typically solves the problems addressed by shortcodes using custom HTML elements as implemented in the media ecosystem or with the entity embed module. I think that shortcodes may also be useful in places where Drupal might also rely on tokens, albeit with an additional module like token filter. The Gutenberg editor also includes a shortcode block that can be used as a flexible way to add a variety of elements into a post content. And I think shortcodes are an interesting paradigm because they're really a tool for power users. Instead of providing a UI to browse and choose elements for something like an image gallery, they allow a savvy editor to quickly write a tag that will construct a gallery using numerical ID values. Don't think this is a tool that most Drupal sites will need, but it could be a really good way for experienced WordPress teams to feel more at home when starting to work with Drupal. So let's talk about shortcode.
Well,
Sure.
off the bat,
Go
I,
ahead.
I'm so curious. I'm so curious because Martin, you said, have you ever wanted your Drupal site to support WordPress style shortcodes? And Chris immediately shakes his head no. So I have to ask Chris, what elicited that reaction?
I have I have a love-hate, but mostly hate relationship with shortcodes, especially since Gutenberg is a thing. Shortcodes solved an interesting problem a long time ago, before we had Gutenberg, before we had blocks, which is I wanna put stuff inside of a post, but the stuff is gonna be like complex HTML or JavaScript or something, and I don't know how to do any of those things. So here's a thing where I can just say progress bar or whatever, and it magically shows up on my page. And that's really cool. But now that we have things like Gutenberg or the ability to add like embed things, I just it feels like not the right tool for the job. So that's my immediate reaction is, did you ever want to put shortcode in Drupal? No, no, I never wanted to do that. I can definitely see it. The other thing that definitely elicited a reaction was nesting shortcodes, because yes, you can do that in a WordPress context, and they can see you doing that in a Drupal context as well. I've also seen the nightmare fuel of taken to an extreme, where there were a lot of, well, a couple in particular, probably still actually page builder plugins for WordPress that are based around shortcodes. So you have like a shortcode wrapper for like your whole page, and then each sort of element that you're putting in through a GUI in your WordPress editor is actually like a set of shortcodes with settings and stuff. So if you actually look at the code, it's like shortcode open and then a bunch of garbage inside. And I've personally tried like migrating that sort of content or like standardizing that content, and it is seriously a nightmare. So yeah, I think I've been burned really hard by shortcodes. Really is what the answer to your question is.
So I don't know if you found this independently, Martin, but I think I may have suggested this module a ways back because I had a client that used it, and their use case was a little bit. It was closer to tokens, but they have some statistics on their site that they want to keep in sync, but they want to use them in CK Editor, right? So they want to say we have saved, I don't know, 100,000 units of work on this thing, and then an admin can just go somewhere in one place and update it from 100,000 to 200,000, and everywhere on the site that's using that token will update. And we use
Yeah, or
short code.
dynamic content too. Like
Yeah,
if you have like
yeah,
a page count or something. Yeah.
exactly that. And we use shortcode because they were coming from WordPress and it was more familiar to them. I ran into some blockers with it. Like the caching was a little wonky and the experience wasn't exactly what you wanted in CKEditor 5. So we ended up switching to just using straight up tokens and token filter and the CKEditor integration for tokens. And then the nice thing is we get to keep the back end. We're just using the state API to store that data. So, state API technically isn't persistent, but it's like 5 values. So if it goes away, it's not a huge deal. And you kind of have to intentionally delete it. So we did use this. We used it for a good 2 or 3 months, but kind of like what Chris said, we found that it didn't quite work the way that we wanted. And why pull WordPressism into Drupal instead of just using the Drupalism that will serve them better elsewhere?
If
Uh,
if you're going to pull a WordPressism into Drupal, that would not be the WordPressism I would choose. I will say too, like you were talking about, oh, now I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh, taking that you don't have to use a GUI, that you can like a power user could just use a short code and they know what it
yeah,
means, and so you don't need to have the GUI. There was actually like one of the most interesting things that happened towards the tail end, like right on the cusp of like when people were starting to do interesting things with short codes, and then we switched over to Gutenberg being a thing, was there was a plugin that was developed and maintained by some folks that I know. I can't remember what it's called now, but it would actually give you sort of a GUI editor for short
hmm,
codes so that like you didn't have to be a power user. You could actually kind of browse things, and it was more similar to like an embed sort of interface, like an O embed kind of thing. And that was actually really interesting. Like the converse is true. Like I think that one of the hurdles for was is that you kind of do need to know what these tokens, these little bits of code-esque things in your content relate to, and this gave you a visual way of like being able to understand what that meant and insert it in a GUI way, which was interesting.
makes sense to me. So yeah, I I personally wouldn't just write off this module off completely. I think it has its uses, but like you said, Martin, they're narrower than I thought when I first encountered it. So, but yeah, it's definitely a cool module. All right, Martin, if our listeners had additional modules of the week that they like to suggest or chat about, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Well, actually, in recent weeks, we've had quite a number of interesting discussions about potential candidates for Module of the Week in the Talking Drupal channel of Drupal Slack, or folks can reach out to me directly as ManClue on all the Drupal and social platforms.
Awesome. We've had you on the show before to talk about, I think, the Pantheon
Content
um,
publisher.
content publisher, which was, which is not specific to Drupal, which is why I think you joined. You're primarily a WordPress guy. Can you give us some background on how you ended up at DrupalCon? Are you switching sides?
Maybe not quite yet. I joined Pantheon in 2021, I guess that's right. And I think it's difficult to exist at Pantheon and not be aware of Drupal and DrupalCon. It's the thing that like the whole company talks about all year long. We were just coming out of a DrupalCon. We're going into a next DrupalCon. We're planning for DrupalCon. DrupalCon's the big deal. So it's hyped up a lot internally. And so just out of curiosity, really, like wanting to see how the other side lives, wanting to see like what the Drupal community is like. And then in particular, since transitioning from actual, software engineering into developer relations, I even more wanted to learn like what is the Drupal community really like in person. And I've, being there long enough, I've touched Drupal enough times in smallish ways, but I've interacted with it a lot more, now than since before I was at Pantheon, which was like maybe once in 10 years or something. And yeah, and there's some interesting things happening. So like it was a really good sort of confluence of things and yeah, that's kind of what brought me out. I wanted to go. It wasn't like I was dragged out there against my will or anything. But I'm not quite switching sides, but there's definitely a lot of really cool things in the Drupal community.
So, Chris, how did DrupalCon compare to WordCamp? What would you say was the biggest similarity and maybe the biggest difference as well?
Well, it's funny. I started a podcast about a month or so ago, based in part on a sticker that I found at DrupalCon US, which is "Come for the code, stay for the community." And I heard that more than once at DrupalCon in Atlanta, and it spoke to me because that is literally the reason why I've been in the WordPress world for coming on 20 years. Is like it's less about the software itself and more about the people in the ecosystem. And to see that articulated in like on a sticker and heard it like repeated over, the week of the event, that was like, oh, I'm at home. Like these are also my people. It's just the software is just a little bit different. So that was the biggest similarity, is like we have a lot of the same problems, we have a lot of the same struggles, we have a lot of the same things that we're facing in contribution and governance and things like that. Different approaches to and different solutions for different things, but like at the core, we're all the same types of people solving the same types of problem in just slightly different ways.
And what about the camp itself? So,
Yeah,
structurally, that's similar or different?
DrupalCon felt to me like a large flagship WordCamp. So in the WordPress ecosystem, we just have WordCamps. We don't have WordCon. We have what are colloquially or maybe officially known as flagship WordCamps. So WordCamp US, WordCamp Europe, WordCamp Asia, and then we have local WordCamps, which are a WordCamp city name, right? WordCamp Salt Lake City, WordCamp Denver, whatever. And the city ones are probably closer to Drupal camps. Maybe, I don't know, maybe a little bit bigger, I guess. But usually like a couple hundred people, really focus on the local development community in the area and yeah, just sort of serving that community and based out of those meetup groups. Whereas the flagship ones are the like if you're going to go to one event in the WordPress space, this is the one that you go to, right? The big difference between the even the flagship WordCamps and DrupalCon is WordCamps have always wanted to make it as easy as possible for people to go to the events. So even the flagship WordCamps are like $50 ticket price for the 2-3 day event,
Okay.
whereas obviously DrupalCons are more than that. The flip side of that is the difference is made up for by sponsors, but also WordPress Community Support, which is a nonprofit entity that exists that like collects all of the sponsorship money and is its own nonprofit that people can donate directly to, but then it's used to fund all the expenses for like event organizers don't need to worry about that sort of stuff.
Okay.
So as an event, like the way that it was organized, the involvement of like the Drupal Association for organizing events or like, being in charge of like the event management staff that deals with that stuff is different, but the event itself felt very, very similar. The types of things that were being like the tracks, the, keynote type stuff, like all of that stuff is very similar to what I would expect to see at a flagship WordCamp.
Hmm, interesting. Chris, what do you think WordCamp could learn from DrupalCon now that you've been to both?
Well, the soapbox that I will get on is that I don't think WordCamps, flagship WordCamps, have to be so cheap. I think that I think that it kind of lowers the expectation of, like, professionalism, because you have this perception that it's like, "Oh, this is really for, like, maybe more for hobbyists, or maybe for more for, like, smaller business type folks and not really for the enterprise," and that's not actually true, but it can communicate that, and I've heard that articulated. And I don't think it needs to be like, you could bump the cost of a WordCamp up to 100, $150, and I don't think you would lose attendees. Maybe even give a local discount if you wanna, if you wanna, like, discount it for the folks that are not coming in, but there are gonna be people coming in from out of state, from out of country, like, they're already investing in this event. You could bump the cost up, and by doing that, then that means that there's more money for other events, or for other projects, or for other things, like, yeah, I think that that's, like, I don't think that it has to be as, and obviously other WordPress events have popped up, particularly this year, that don't follow that model, right? I went to PressConf a couple months ago, and I think that was like $500 or something for a 200-person event in Arizona. There's a couple other things coming this summer and fall that are similar sorts of things. Like, obviously, this model is not a problem. People that are in the professional spaces will pay the ticket price, and those are really, really good events. So I don't think you lose anything by just bumping that up a little bit.
I want to chime in too and just clarify that it sound clarify one point on the WordCamp side, because on the DrupalCon side, one of the reasons why the price is higher is because it's one of the primary fundraising outlets for the
Yep,
DA, right? Most of their
yep,
funding comes from it, and so
yep,
they're directly using the revenue that comes from DrupalCon to run Drupal.org and all the
yep,
other services that the DA provides for us. And, they do have discounts for students and things like that because they're not trying to gatekeep or keep people out, but it's really a revenue source. And it sounds like WordCamp doesn't follow that model, right?
no,
There's a
no.
nonprofit associated with it, but that nonprofit isn't providing anything other than helping fund camps and manage camps, right?
Correct, and I think for a time, it was also, like, I believe it was WordPress community, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was WordPress community support that was also, like, sponsoring, like, if your meetup was using meetup.com, then they would foot the bill for that. I think they stopped that maybe a couple years ago, and there's, like, an open source team that's working on, like, a WordPressy version of meetup.com, like a plugin for that purpose. But yeah, that it's basically like the goal of WordCamps and the goal of the WordPress community support nonprofit is essentially to keep events at cost. And, like, they're it can go up a little bit, it can go down a little bit, and that difference means that, if they have some money in the bank, then another camp that, like, went had higher expenses than they expected, and they wasn't made up for by their sponsors, well, we've got you covered, whatever.
Okay.
So, Chris, put yourself in the shoes of a WordCon organizer. Let's say they had $200 extra coming in revenue per attendee. How would you allocate that money? You've alluded to some ways it could be used, either for the conference or for the greater WordPress community.
Well, we don't have a sort of entity that exists like the Drupal Association that can take those funds and, like, fund actual projects. I think that's a really cool idea and a really good model that it is lacking, kind of. That was one of the things that I came away from DrupalCon being like, "Yeah, that's a thing that I think works better than what we have." But even, like, beyond that, either, sponsoring people to come out, paying speakers, even, like, marketing type stuff, like, but yeah, paying speakers is a thing that has been talked about, out in and outside the community for a long time and has never ever been a thing. But, like, if you go outside the WordPress community into, like, other tech spaces, yeah, you pay your speakers and you pay for airfare or, like something, anything. And I think that's one easy place where that sort of extra could go. Yeah, there's sort of a lot of things, I think.
So
But yeah, there's a lot of like lacking in like like you said, like the Drupal Association is funded by DrupalCons, and so they can then take that money and say, "This is a project that we care about and we want to invest funds in," or "This is a project the community cares about and we want to invest funds in," right? And it would be nice if a similar such structure existed within official WordPress channels.
So, Chris, you mentioned, oh, I lost it. What did you mention?
A lot
Chris,
of
you
things.
Chris, you mentioned having some more money available for compensating speakers at the
Mhm.
conferences. So I just recently became aware about the Longhorn PHP conference, which is a just general PHP conference that takes place in Austin, Texas, which happens to be where I live. And I was looking on their site because their call for proposals is open now, and really cool. And this is totally a plug for the Drupal community out there to submit some sessions. Is they compensate their speakers, right? So they will pay for your hotel if you're coming from outside of Austin. They will pay for your airfare if you're coming from outside of Texas. Asterisk on the international travel, but I think that's an interesting model that the Drupal community doesn't really follow, right? At our conferences, there's very limited compensation for speakers. And so I
Mhm.
wonder if you had any thoughts on that, and will we see you at Longhorn PHP conference?
Well, I'm just hearing about it now, but no, I think that is yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be, like, in the form of, like, here's your paycheck for coming, even just compensating, like, room and board, I think, and travel expenses, like, that's huge, like and it also, like, makes your event more inclusive, right? Like a huge barrier to going to large events, even as a speaker, is the expense. And if you're freelancing or your employer isn't willing to foot that bill, then that's a lot of money, especially like, if you're coming internationally or you're coming, flying in from Hawaii or something, right? Like airfare is not cheap. And even just having the security of knowing that that's taken care of opens the playing field to get a more sort of diverse and inclusive, speaker list. And that's also like a thing that just events broadly in the tech space kind of I see struggle with is making your speaker list inclusive of all voices and of all people. And yeah, and I think that there's reasons why things are a certain way because of whatever, and the more that we can do to break those barriers and include diverse voices, the better.
So, what about the inverse of this, though? Is there anything that you kind of have come to expect at conferences, for WordCamp gatherings that you didn't see at DrupalCon? You were a little surprised. Is there anything that DrupalCon should consider adding?
When I was in Portland last year for WordCamp US, literally every night after a day's worth of sessions, there was something going on, and possibly multiple somethings. Side parties hosted by GoDaddy or like, Pressable or whoever, and, maybe there's drinking involved, maybe there's not. At DrupalCon, there's the Pantheon party, which was fun, and there's a couple little things, but I kind of expected more after party stuff happening, just because like it's become sort of such a big thing for networking and meeting other people in the community. Like both there's an official after party, but there was just after parties literally ever like I was party hopping a couple nights, right? And and of course that's exhausting, but, like yeah, I mean, it's not like this even, like, the scale of the 2 events, like, the size of DrupalCon Atlanta in terms of attendees and versus the size of WordCamp US in Portland, like, it's basically we use the same Portland event center that DrupalCon was at, like, it's the same-ish size of people, so it was a little bit surprising that there weren't more sort of other events sort of, yeah, happening at
Yeah.
DrupalCon. Maybe I just didn't get invited to the parties,
But it stands to reason that the Pantheon party would be top of mind for you, so can be
obviously.
forgiven for that, yeah. Were there any other things about DrupalCon that you found surprising?
surprising. A thing that existed, and I knew this existed before actually going there at DrupalCon that I've never seen at WordCamps is booth demos. And that's like it's like I don't know, obviously Pantheon is big on booth demos, right? If you've been to a DrupalCon. And it's like it's like a mini conference. And like at Pantheon, at our booth, we were specifically inviting like partners and people that were not within Pantheon. I mean, we had a couple things that were our own thing, but mostly like going to other people and bringing them in to tell their stories of how they build things. And I just think that that's a really cool space to do like a mini side event inside the event and kind of curate, what sorts of topics or whatever you wanna bring up. That was really cool. And it sort of worked better than I expected. I kind of expected like a dueling banjos thing with the Pantheon booth being right next to the Acquia booth, where like we're like dueling microphones and like, oh, we're gonna turn our speakers up louder. But that was never an issue. And it was like I stole some of your food and, like, I don't know, maybe it's but yeah, I mean, it was I don't know, the other thing that was surprising is the automatic booth, but we won't go into that.
Yeah, I think I mean, I've never been to a DrupalCon, but just knowing the Drupal community, like, business is business, right? There is competition, but the community itself is close-knit, and
Yeah.
people change jobs, change careers, change companies all the time. So, I just don't think that there's room for that cutthroat type of business dealing at these conferences because everybody knows everybody and everyone and companies have realized, I think in the Drupal community at least, that rising tide lifts all boats, right? If you're working together, you look at just this Drupal CMS initiative and what's been going on there, right? People are lending in some cases some of their business secrets, right? On how they build a Drupal site because it helps the community, right? You make Drupal better, you make their product better, you make your own company better. And so I don't think you'll find a whole lot of that. If you go to like a general conference, like was it CES or something, like there's a lot more jostling to make yourself seen because everything's proprietary and everything is you need people to only focus on you. Whereas in Drupal, we're all on the same team when it comes to
That was
Drupal.
another thing that I learned sort of about the Drupal community while I was at DrupalCon that I didn't necessarily know going in was there's really an ecosystem of, like, helping each other and helping everyone within the community to build the best solution for whatever the thing is. Like, if I have a form plugin and you have a form plugin, like, I might ask you, "Hey, what does your form plugin do, and can we work together to make this a better form plugin that has all the things?" Whereas if I'm a WordPress developer and I have a form plugin and you have a form plugin, well, my form plugin and your form plugin might eventually become a paid plugin in the future, so I'm not gonna work with you, and I'm gonna, like, keep my code and my secrets to myself, and it feels nicer. The working together feels nicer, and obviously, like, the flip side is, the joke that like, "Oh, WordPress developers make money, like, because we sell stuff." Like, yeah, but, like, also it fosters this sort of competition, and competition isn't necessarily a bad thing, but also, like, I like the spirit of, like, being collaborative and working together and finding, like, the definitive canonical solution for, like, this is the form plugin that we will all use, and it does the things that we want it to do, and we don't need to, like, search through 50,000 plugins to find the one thing that, like, works for, what I'm gonna be using it for.
Yeah. And it's not even just the specific form plugin because the other modules in the ecosystem need to work with whichever one you chose, right? So
Mhm.
if I'm using module X that does Y and it doesn't integrate with Gravity Forms, but I have to use Gravity Forms because every other plugin works with it. Well, guess what? Now I can't use that other plugin that I need, or I need to have a second form plugin and find out, or I have to figure out a paid product for the plugin that I need. And yeah, that's definitely one of the
The
biggest
the
drawbacks I think.
ecosystem the
Yeah.
ecosystem of add-on plugins for premium plugins or other plugins that are sort of like not quite child plugins, but like, Gravity Forms, but it's not, I mean, like add on to Gravity Forms that does X, right? Like
Yeah.
it's there's a lot, and there's a lot for like a lot of different, like the major sort of plugins that are like used for, WooCommerce is a big example, Gravity, other form plugins. Like there's a lot of sort of add-on plugins that like you need this thing, possibly this paid thing, to use this other thing. Like, if you don't have the other thing, well, obviously, you're gonna have to go back and get that thing, the paid
Yeah.
thing, because otherwise you can't do this thing over here. And if
Yeah.
you wanna do that thing without the first thing, well, then you're gonna be searching a lot more for something that does all the things, which is even yeah,
You may
it's not
not find.
super user friendly.
Yeah.
So, Chris, in your blog post, you mentioned that Experience Builder is what WordPress full site editor should be. Can you tell
Mm.
us a little bit more about that comment and why Experience Builder excites you?
Yeah, so I've been using full site editing in WordPress a lot, particularly recently, and you can do a lot of cool stuff with it. I've made full on websites using just the base 2025 theme and full site editing. And it's like, if there's one theme that can do everything, then why would I ever need another theme? That's cool. But I also like, in using it a lot, like I run into all of the problems and things that like the UI is lacking or isn't fully developed yet or whatever. And the demo that I saw in Atlanta for Experience Builder was like the solution, not only from like a user interface perspective, but also from a, developer perspective, how to customize stuff that I feel like full site editing hasn't gotten to yet. And if full site editing was those things, it would be great. I'd have no complaints. I constantly like I again love hate the full site editor, love hate Gutenberg. I felt like if Experience Builder delivers on everything that was demoed in Atlanta, then like that would be amazing. That would be the answer to everything that I have hoped and dreamed that full site editing could be in WordPress. Like it was yeah, I was super impressed.
I think we're all excited about it.
Good to hear.
We're proof is in the pudding.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, right.
Yeah. One of the most impressive pieces is how fast it's moving.
Mhm,
I mean, I personally have some architectural concerns, but we're also kind of in zero alpha. Like it keeps breaking things,
mm.
but they're very much in the prototype, move fast and break things stage, so that's fine. But as we get closer to 1.0, those types of breaking changes should, and I don't mean breaking changes, just changing their internal structure and stuff. I mean, there's a breaking change recently that came out with Gin in 11.2, right? And that are kind of structural. And I have full confidence that they'll solve that particular piece of it. But I'm getting a little bit excited about Experience Builder. I think the other concern I have about it is how it will integrate with existing sites,
Mhm,
because a lot of these, like Layout Builder really was a hard one to integrate into existing sites. You kind of had to plan a site around Layout Builder, and hopefully Experience Builder isn't the same way. Hopefully you can turn it on and use it for what you want to use it for. But yeah, it's impressive how quickly that's moving.
yeah, and Gutenberg broke a lot of stuff, especially in the early development too, like a lot.
Yeah,
Like, I know when I was at Human Made, we were using Gutenberg before it was merged into Core, and that meant that some of our teams are having to like rewrite huge swaths of code to accommodate the latest version of Gutenberg. And on one particular project, like we delivered the project before Gutenberg landed in core and we're done. And then they were on this really old version of Gutenberg for like 2 years after and couldn't upgrade WordPress because they couldn't upgrade to the point where Gutenberg was
yeah,
integrated into core because everything had changed out from under them, and then basically it would require a full rewrite of everything to hook into all the things in the right way. And yeah, I mean, obviously Gutenberg has worked out those things. So that it's just the product of you know building a new thing that is so kind of all encompassing.
yep. Yeah. It's inherently a difficult issue.
Yeah.
Okay, so this next question, I think we're going to spend some time here, and I have some strong opinions. But before I provide my opinions, I'm very curious what you think here. So you're primarily a WordPress developer. You've done some Drupal things. Having dabbled in Drupal, are there things that you wish WordPress had that Drupal has?
I mean, everybody talks about how the database architecture is so much better and nicer and cleaner in Drupal than WordPress, and queries are more optimized, and obviously that's a thing. I really like I really like the idea and the implementation of, like, structured data. WordPress has the equivalent in, like, custom post meta, but, like, it's I feel like that's a little bit less efficient, and there's a lot of dumb things like hard coded URLs in the database that are then like that's your site URL is hard coded in the database, which is you know you don't you just don't need to do that. And it just causes more problems later when you're migrating content across like
Yeah.
environments. Yeah, I mean, there's I probably don't go into the weeds in Drupal enough to I would probably have a lot longer of a laundry list of things that I wish Drupal or WordPress would do. Obviously, I love Composer, and I would love for WordPress to more natively support Composer without some a third party or a different kind of architecture.
That
Yeah,
I think that's my number one wish list. There are
yeah,
so you can install WordPress with Composer.
yep,
One of the things I've realized though that I didn't realize until I tried doing it this way. Drupal, the Drupal Association and the Composer facade is one of the biggest strengths of the project. With WordPress, excuse me, with WordPress, when you use Composer, for core itself, you have to use a third party first off, and you have to choose one. There's
mhm,
multiple.
mhm,
But
mhm,
because plugins are paid, each individual plugin may or may not support Composer. And if they
yep,
do, they're going to have their own endpoints. But
yep,
one of the most painful things I've experienced is that there are a lot of plugins, even if you use Composer to manage them, when you activate the paid portion, they'll just flat out download the files that the paid plugin manually. So if you have
yep,
like WooCommerce, I think does this, it will replace itself with the paid plugin version. So if you use a system like Aqua or Pantheon or Platform SH where the actual directory is not writable because that's a security issue, you just can't activate these plugins on production without
yep,
significant hoops.
yep, yep,
My my second wish list item, again, after having worked on both for a couple of years, is properly versioned plugins versus, or I guess I should say plugin metadata or theme metadata. But Drupal has a info YAML file for plugin for
mhm,
modules and themes. So that you can say like this is the version that this is what it depends on. These are all
yeah,
those things. And WordPress doesn't really have a dependency system
no.
there. Like with
There has been recently-ish added the concept of plugin dependencies where you can write a plugin that is dependent on another plugin, and if the other plugin isn't installed and active, then plugin X
yeah,
cannot be activated. That's fairly recent, and I remember the Composer conversation coming up when that was being discussed because it was like, "Well, there already exists a model for this thing that we're talking about. Could we use this as an excuse to use Composer?" And the answer was, "No, we don't wanna do that," because that it would change too many things. And I kinda feel like that's a missed opportunity because, yeah, there is a model for dependencies that is just
yeah,
that already exists. You don't have to build your own plugin dependency system, but we like to do things the hard way, I guess.
yeah,
And to your point about premium plugins, recently, like as recently as a couple weeks ago, announced at WordCamp Europe, there was the Federated and Independent Repositories project or FAIR project that was announced.
yes,
Um, and the concept is that you can have decentralized repositories or mini repositories where your code sort of canonically lives, that is connected through this protocol that's talking to all of the other, discovery servers and whatever, so that perhaps if you did have a premium plugin and it was through a fair based repository, then you wouldn't have to jump through as many hoops. It wouldn't
Yeah.
necessarily replace the code like when you activate it, it would just be coming from the source. And maybe you
Yeah.
have to like authenticate or pay to get access to that repository or whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
But there is, I mean, conversations are happening, which I think are really interesting and exciting. And I think that there will be some new innovation in that space in the next couple years.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Nick, you said composer support, right? Is your sort of top on your wish list for WordPress. And
Mhm.
I love Composer, right? I think it's been great for Drupal. At the same time, big challenges when it was introduced, right? Composer turned off a lot of Drupalers, right, on Drupal 7 who were not prepared to deal with an entire new concept, right? It was a foundational concept and it was like world changing, right? And it kind of maybe accelerated Drupal becoming more skewed to enterprise and less hospitable, right, for hobbyists and smaller organizations and smaller sites. So I think WordPress, right, has been doing a great job of meeting those needs in part by avoiding things as complex and
Yep.
elegant as Composer, right? So I don't know,
Yeah.
Chris, do you want to comment a little bit on, you know, what you think WordPress should do in that regard and what you think Drupal should do? Like, should we be doing different things? Should we be doing the same thing?
I mean, WordPress has always been one of WordPress's strong suits is backwards compatibility, and the idea like, a lot of Drupal 7 sites migrate to WordPress because they don't want to ever have to think about the migration from one Drupal version to another Drupal version. WordPress, you just like, "I'm on WordPress now, I don't need to think about that as much." And I think that's where like, that's one of WordPress's strengths. Sometimes it's to its detriment because being so concerned about backwards compatibility means it's you are slower to change things that would be breaking changes. I with regards to Composer particularly, like, I would love for, like, a yes and kind of thing where, like, it supports Composer, but you don't have to use it sort of thing. Because, yeah, for sure, like, I'm not gonna convince my dad to run a command line, you know, command in a terminal to install WordPress on a site, but I can tell him to click a couple buttons on like
Yeah.
Bluehost or whatever and install WordPress, and then you have a site that you can just manage on your own. And I think that the one of the things that WordPress has always had going for it is that it can do both things. It can be both for my dad, who's moderately tech savvy, and it can also be for like Fortune 500 companies or Fortune 50 companies managing huge swaths of content and data and whatever across multiple sites and multi sites and whatever.
I think so I agree with what both of you are saying, right? I mean, Drupal officially now has dropped support for managing sites using tarballs, period, right? You have to use Composer. That's the only supported way to install Drupal.
Oh, I
And I
missed
agree that
that. That's an actual requirement
yeah,
now. You
yeah,
you
yeah.
you must use Composer.
And I think that's a double-edged sword. I think that that can present problems, but the on the flip side for WordPress, I work a lot of my clients are enterprise, and there are some plugins that you just flat out cannot use Composer for. You just can't. And so hosts like Platform SH provide a way to do that. The pull requests to add those plugins or change those plugins are just flat out unreviewable. Like they're literally 1 million lines changed. And it and so I've had issues where sites have broken. I mean, we have testing and pipelines, so we've caught it. But we've had sites that have broken because they changed, a dev changed something else that they weren't paying attention to that they should have changed when they were updating a couple plugins. And because it's a 2 million line diff, a million added, a million removed, y- like you just kind of have to push it up and test it manually. You
Yep.
can't, whereas with Composer, yeah, the Composer lock is big, but you can see like that's just one file that's changing. You can check what changed.
Yeah.
There's other tools for checking that. So there, both sides have have detrimental things, but it's more that WordPress doesn't even have the option. And the opposite
Yeah.
is true with Drupal now. Drupal doesn't even have the option to not use Composer, which is its own issue.
So I just want to chime in to quickly say I think it's ironic, given that actually the only way, or the only currently supported way to install Drupal CMS is by downloading a tarball. You run Composer afterwards, but you actually start by downloading a tarball.
That's hilarious. You're right, by the way. Okay. I have two other really big WordPress things that I wish. Oh, I have two really big things that I wish WordPress did that Drupal doesn't. Oh, and I should preface this by you've already brought up the biggest one, which is the paid plugin. I think the paid plugin ecosystem should go away in WordPress, but
That's not
config
gonna
manage-
happen.
I know it won't. There's too much money to be made there. But config management. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but
Yeah.
Drupal has a feature where on your local machine, you make some changes. You can export that config. That config with a bunch of caveats. That config will be deployed as is. WordPress, unless I'm not aware of something, is still very much make your changes, write a notepad note on what you had to do, put in the ticket, deploy to production, do the same steps, and hope you didn't forget something. Drives me nuts. I feel
Yeah,
like
I
it would
mean,
be
there
done.
have been a couple sort of plugin based ways of addressing that I have seen. Forum One has a plugin, WPCFM, which I think they wrote that plugin to do the Drupal thing and saves settings and stuff to a config and you can and sync it across
Hmm,
environments. There've been a variety of like implementations. I've seen like even like I don't know if it's an official VIP thing or if it's something that was on a project that was a WordPress VIP project that I worked on once, but like there was a tool that would export like all of your site settings to like a JSON file, so then you could import that
oh,
on a different. So like there's plugin based ways of doing stuff like that, but yeah, natively without like syncing databases or something, yeah,
yeah.
there's nothing, and it's awful. It's absolutely awful. I
Yeah,
agree.
the amount of production database meddling you do for WordPress is terrifying.
Database meddling, period, should just not be a thing.
I mean, I've certainly done a dev to, like, try to figure out what's going on, right? Or, like, a
Yeah, for sure.
local
Yeah, that's
copy,
fine.
but on production, I can
Yeah.
count on one hand the amount of times I've done something on the database. The final feature that I don't even know if you know that this exists. This is something that not a lot of WordPress people do and a lot of Drupal people take for granted is responsive image management. So Drupal,
Mhm.
you can define image sizes for given situations, and Drupal will only generate a specific size once it's been requested,
Oh.
and only for the sizes that it knows it needs. So, for example, let's say you
Hmm.
have a thumbnail, you upload a card, it's 100 by 100 for the thumbnail. First of all, it will only generate that thumbnail when somebody visits the page where that thumbnail is presented. And that, by the way, that works on all the responsive. So you have to like look at it on mobile for the mobile size to even be requested, and it will generate it on the fly. One of the huge advantages there, there's a lot of advantages. One of them is if you delete that thumbnail, the next time somebody tries to view it, Drupal will go, "Oh, that's missing. Let me generate it," and it will regenerate it automatically. WordPress does the opposite. WordPress goes, "What are all the sizes that are possible? You've uploaded a file. Let me generate every single size, even if you only need two of them.
Mhm.
If you delete one of those, WordPress has no way of knowing that it was deleted.
Nope.
It's it's just gone. You'll just
Yep.
get a 404. That
Yep.
also means that if you're uploading like a banner image that needs 3 presets, it's going to get 72 presets. So your file
Yes.
storage can get out of control too.
And if you ever add a new size that you need,
Oh, it
like you're adding a different
regenerates.
size card, you have to like force regeneration. If you already
Yep.
have like a million images and now you have this additional size and
Yep.
you're regenerating all these thumbnails, it's going to be doing all of those things. Yeah, no, it's I that's really dynamic image generation is pretty awesome.
It
I
intercepts the
think that
request and generates
yeah.
it if it needs it and returns it. Like,
I've
it's
seen
amazing.
implementations in WordPress where it's using either AWS or maybe Fastly to get dynamic image sizes so that you don't have to do that on the fly, or even just like outsourcing your image, your uploads to like a CDN, so like it's not
Yep.
on the same.
Yeah.
All of those things are kind of workarounds for the fact that WordPress just generates just far too many images,
Yep.
just fundamentally. And yeah, I've worked on sites that have had like maybe 10 different image sizes, right? And for every image you upload, it's going to have the original, a resized original, and then 10. And so if you upload 100, that's like, yeah, I
Well,
mean, it's 10,000
well,
1,000
Chris,
1,000 images.
you're thinking like a WordPresser, because in Drupal, because it's dynamic and it's only the ones you need, you're let's say you have a 3-column card, right? That 3-column card is gonna have 3, 3 or 4 sizes responsively. But then when that image
Right.
shows up on the homepage, it's gonna be a feature image, and it's gonna have 4 or 5 sizes itself. So when you do responsive images fully in Drupal for a fully featured site, you might have, no exaggeration, you might have 50 or 60 presets, 50 or 60 different sizes across all the components and all the browser sizes that you have. You do that in WordPress, 60 image sizes. Every time you upload one that's big enough, you're gonna get 60 different thumbnails,
Yep.
and
Yep.
you're not gonna use them.
Nope.
So, yes, I think that that's something that WordPress would benefit from
Yep.
pretty
Yep.
pretty
Absolutely.
significantly.
Yep. I
Um,
agree.
and
No
I've
arguments.
mostly rebuilt it in WordPress, but licensing in WordPress is a little funky at the moment. So I don't know if that's something that we'll be releasing.
You can release to me personally.
So, Chris, we've talked a lot about things that are sort of, valuable capabilities of Drupal that, maybe WordPress could benefit from. Let's maybe turn that around and talk about, like when you start poking around with Drupal, are there things that you miss that you wish Word or Drupal had that are sort of commonplace in WordPress?
The biggest like, my biggest struggle with Drupal a year ago, I would have said, was just knowing how and where to do stuff, because the menu is not intuitive to my brain. There's, like, too many menus, too many things nested in other things, and I don't know where to go for all the things, and that's one of the reasons why I like Drupal CMS a lot, is because it makes sense to my brain, and it could just be the left side nav. It could just be because that's where I look for things, but it feels like it's more structured in a way that things are grouped together, and my first experience when I installed Drupal CMS was like, "Oh, like this looks familiar, and the installation experience was pleasant, like asking me what type of site I'm building, and what type of content do I want for that site. Like that made a lot of sense, as opposed to like a big form that you fill out and then make all those decisions later. Making those decisions as part of the creation process made a lot of sense to me. And yeah, so like the UI is a thing. The UI in Drupal CMS, I'm a big fan of. I also like, again, with the not knowing where to go for things, when I played a little bit with the AI recipe and having a little chatbot that I could ask questions to, was helpful to me as somebody who doesn't touch Drupal very often, because not only does that mean, like, the little AI chatbot can do the things for me, but also can kind of teach me along the way how to do those things. And then, obviously, the side effect of that is me getting more comfortable with the UI and where things are and how to do stuff. Because yeah, that's been the one of the biggest struggles that I've encountered. I'll also nitpick one little thing, because I was actually just doing this today, where I was creating a couple different event blocks for the Pantheon site, and like for our Pantheon office hours. And basically these are like the exact same thing with different dates, right? And in WordPress, I know because I've used it, there's a plugin called Duplicate Post, where I could just click on the duplicate button and it will just do the thing. And there isn't, at least we don't have installed a module that does that thing. So I have to manually copy paste from one tab into the other
Let
tab,
let me
uh,
c
all the
ask you a
things.
question. Do you
Yeah.
do you think which situation, knowing what you know about the Drupal community, which is more likely? Drupal
That
doesn't
there's not a
have.
thing or that we just haven't installed it? Yeah, we probably
Yeah,
haven't installed
yeah.
it.
There is one that can allow you to clone.
Well, and there's
Uh,
probably other ways of doing it too, right? Like, we need to have an actual, like, post entity for every single event, or do we just need sort of like a standard thing and that we can just apply this date, this date, this date, this date to, and then
Yeah.
it repeats on the
Mar-
page too, like
Martin might be the person to ask that question too.
Yeah, I've gone too far deep down that rabbit hole of, different ways of handling events and lots of different approaches. I mean, even the topic of cloning entities is interesting because there are, as with a lot of things in Drupal, more than one actual module that will do
Yep.
cloning, but actually for Drupal CMS, they decided to basically build something from scratch using what we call ECA, which is event condition action, sort of a visual way to build out custom functionality and really sort of realizing that alone could really provide that in a way that could be customizable. So if you wanted
Yep.
something that could, you know, only clone certain fields but then leave other ones blank for a fresh copy, that's something you could easily build yourself as
Yeah.
well.
yeah, and I'm saying this realizing too that, like, I don't know, 8 or so, maybe 10 years ago, I was working for a WordPress plugin company that was an event management plugin. So, like, yeah, events events are a very common problem to solve in both WordPress and Drupal spaces.
One other thing about this too, there's also a new hook entity duplicate, which allows you to react when entities are duplicated, so you can clean things up. Because Chris, one of the big issues with cloning, by the way, is especially on multilingual sites, is when you clone it, it clones all the content, all languages,
Mhm,
which
mhm.
is typically unexpected for editors are like, I want to clone this, change the content, then translate it. But they forget it, if they're not
Right.
used to looking at the Spanish or French version or whatever, and they don't retranslate it, well, the French and Spanish version of the cloned content is whatever it was cloned from.
Well, translation is a whole other rabbit hole,
Oh, yeah,
to get into with WordPress too.
yeah, that's I'm dealing with that issue right now for a client actually because there's a function you're supposed to wrap everything in text domain, I think,
Mhm,
for
mhm,
translation, and WordPress recently changed how they work with that,
mhm,
which and they're using my favorite function name of all time in WordPress or Drupal to tell you. So in Drupal, when you change the way something behaves, we use deprecations, right? We throw a
mhm.
deprecation warning. WordPress's solution for deprecations is a function
Just doing it
called
wrong.
"You're doing it wrong,"
Yeah,
which
doing it
is
wrong. Yep.
which is the most it's so pretentious. Like, I'm not doing it wrong. You changed how it's being done out from
No, you're
under
doing it
me,
wrong.
and now I need to change. Yes, I need to change something, but I'm not doing it wrong. I'm doing it correct. You changed the way that it's supposed to be done. And a lot of plugins, so the translation piece, getting back to translation, WordPress changed where that happens, and so previous
Yep.
translations don't work in the same phase, or I think more accurately, the translations didn't work previously, but it just ignored the fact that it couldn't translate that piece at that stage in the boot cycle, and now it throws an exception. So all these plugins need to update for, I assume it's 6.8 WordPress, and so a lot of plugins broke on 6.8 because they have translation in the wrong place and they haven't updated their text domain calls.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
use
so
I use I use underscore underscore doing it wrong sometimes just in Slack as, like, almost an emoji type response, like, because it's yeah, it is absolutely the dumbest function name.
it is
Um,
hilarious. When I
it's the best
found
it's
that,
the best for humor.
It's
it
kind of
is. When I
fantastic.
And
found that, I was like, "Is this real? Like, what do you mean?"
well, it's like WordPress still has a lot of sort of legacy, almost like inside jokes. Like there used to be, I think it's been removed, but there used to be a response where if your nonce, which is a token that proves that you are who you say you are, if your nonce was invalid, it would throw an error that said cheating, huh? And there's like so that and I think there's probably comments and stuff too. I think the cheating message was removed because, like, it wasn't super helpful for people that ran into that and
Yeah,
didn't know how they got there, who weren't developers familiar with, like, that particular line of code. And so, obviously, if they like, a more helpful message would be
Yeah.
desirable. But there's legacy artifacts of stuff like that that are still in WordPress code that and I don't think doing it wrong is ever going away. I don't think there's going to be a doing it wrong for doing it wrong.
But
Yeah.
doing it wrong, right? Doing it wrong, right? I think exemplifies the practicality of the WordPress ecosystem and community, right? Like Drupal
Yeah.
is very elegantly architected, and you can do all these things, and you kind of like, oh, that's amazing. Like they did a really good job with that. And meanwhile, WordPress is getting things done, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it definitely, in its defense, it definitely told me immediately that there was something being done wrong. It was very difficult to find out where. The one thing
Mhm.
that was missing was it didn't provide any way to find out where the function that was being done wrong was being called from. It
Mm.
didn't, and since it was text domain, my god, that thing gets called 400 million times
Yes.
on a typical WordPress site. So it was very, very difficult to track down. What even once I found that you're doing it wrong, it was very difficult to track down where it was being called. And it turns out it's a plugin that hasn't been that's paid, that hasn't been updated yet for 6.8. And
Mm.
so, we're stuck waiting on some proprietary code being updated. But I did chuckle when I finally found it. And I created a little plugin. This is a fun little side note. I created a little plugin that says you're doing it wrong and says, shouldn't you think about Drupal when WordPress initializes? But because I wanted to get an idea of how you're doing it wrong worked and how the boot cycle worked, because I was trying to debug where it was. So I thought that was a little funny. But yeah,
And I'm sure, Nick, you haven't released that just for licensing reasons, right?
I have not released that because it's a little too snarky. But I shared it with the dev team on that particular project, and they got a chuckle out of it too.
I don't know there's such a thing as too snarky. I had a friend that wrote a plugin that's in the WordPress plugins repository called Login Roulette that would just, like, randomly log you out. Like, Login Roulette is like it would just on
Huh.
on any given page load, it might log you out.
Data consistency must be fun on project. That would be hilarious, though. All right. Anything else that you wish the WordPress kind of project as a whole did after having used Drupal a couple of times?
I mean, less about the project and more about the ecosystem in the community. There's a few there's an organization that has been sort of more public more recently, a nonprofit organization, 501(c)(6), the WP Community Collective, who is essentially in many ways trying to kind of step in as like an external version of what the Drupal Association kind of is within the Drupal community, except that
Okay.
because but it's coming in from the outside, right? It's not part of the
Yeah.
WordPress project. It's coming from a community initiated sort of collective thing. And also like the FAIR project is not something that is coming out of the WordPress project itself. It was a bunch of developers and leaders and whoever who built it sort of on the side to address things like supply chain security, governance, and things like that, sort of in spite of the WordPress project rather than because of or at the
Yeah.
direction of WordPress leadership. And that is a tension that has probably always existed, but is existing maybe more in the spotlight now than a year ago or 2 years ago. And, like, I'm really excited about these new community projects and these new organizations, but it's also, like, it feels like again, like, back to the point of, like, WordPress and Drupal have the same sort of challenges, like, it feels like a lot of these things the Drupal community has already sort of collectively come up with a solution that is working for them, whereas WordPress is now at 43% of the internet dealing with this sort of thing, and that creates a lot more pain than if we had maybe figured this stuff out 10 years ago when we were
Yeah.
20% of the internet, like it's a lot to shift all of these sort of moving pieces that are very, very like high level at the scale that WordPress is now, and then ask everybody to kind of go along for the ride and Yeah.
That's a great point. I think one of the one of the biggest things that I noticed using WordPress on real projects after a couple of years versus Drupal is I think that's the thing that Drupal figured out that allows it to make these architectural decisions, right? Drupal figured out how to make these shift now. And Drupal 7 to Drupal 8 was incredibly painful. Mistakes were definitely made. I think if we could go back and do some things again, we would do some things differently. But we learned from that lesson, and each kind of iteration of Drupal has gotten easier to upgrade to because we found out when those architectural shifts can happen, how to notify developers that they're happening, and how to do that in a way that's not super disruptive to contrib and custom code. So, for example, I don't know how much you know about the nitty gritty of Drupal, but one of the things that's a little quirky about Drupal is we have a file called a .module file, right? It's a PHP file, but for whatever reason, it's called a it's .module, and we're very close to being able to finally its mere existence is legacy, right? And we're very close to being able to get rid of that, but that will be an extraordinary amount of work for custom code and for contributed code to modify, right? So even if we're a month away from being able to get rid of it, the way that that will work is that deprecation will happen in 11.3, which should come out sometime in December. But Drupal is going to support .module files at least until Drupal 13, which
Hmm.
is two major versions away. And I don't know the exact math off the top of my head, but probably 4 or 5 years from now, right? And so that's a very disruptive thing. It's something we should do. There's a long list of reasons why that we don't have to get into now, but we're going to give people 4 or 5 years to do that. We're not going to be like, hey, tomorrow you have to get rid of them. Sorry, it's 600 hours of work.
And the other thing is, as well, worth mentioning is that there's a chance that there could be like a project update bot rector
Yeah,
rule that could scaffold out at least the first draft of what that might look like, so that
yeah,
as a module maintainer, you don't necessarily have to do all of that work yourself. We actually have this community process in place that will look for those deprecations and try to fix them automatically, so that one of the benefits of posting your code to Drupal.org is that you actually get assistance not just from other members of the community, but some of the other tooling as well.
yeah,
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I that from even just like a software road mapping and like development perspective, like there's never really been a consistent and coherent model within WordPress that I'm aware of for like adding new stuff to WordPress. Like when Gutenberg dropped, it was mostly because Matt said it's time. And Gutenberg development happened because Matt said we should build a thing that is React based and is kind of a block based editor and kind of like these other things over here. And that's like there was a
mm,
lot of strife and hand wringing, and even now I think there's a lot of people that just first plugin they install is the classic editor because they don't want to deal with it. Where like maybe there could have been more community input or more community education, like why should people care about this thing before
yeah,
it was just put into WordPress, like right before or maybe right at a WordCamp US. And yeah, like I feel like especially with like the association and just like the collaboration that is just almost embedded in the Drupal community, like it feels like there's more community input into what things should go into, like what things should get pulled into core, what things should get like road
yeah,
mapped, what things should we be thinking about that there have been attempts and there have been projects and there have been like site teams and whatever that have looked at this, but at the end of the day it's largely Matt who makes the decision about like where the direction of WordPress is going.
So, Chris, returning to the title of our show today, you were a
Mhm,
WordPresser at DrupalCon Atlanta.
mhm.
What was your biggest takeaway from that conference?
That we're more similar than we are different, and that, like, a big takeaway that I took, particularly in my role as a developer advocate, is that we should be having these conversations more. Like, more WordPressers should go to DrupalCon. I would like to see Drupalers go to WordPress events, and that, like, yeah, we should talk more. We should collaborate more because we're more similar than we are different. The struggles in the Drupal space are the same as the struggles in the WordPress space and vice versa. And there's also learnings that I think, people on both sides of the fence have and the communities on both sides of the fence have made. And I want to see, like, events that are inclusive of both camps, that where we can kind of compare and contrast and collaborate and share. Like, that's a big thing that I think, yeah, I would like to see.
Do we call it Whoople or
Nope.
Drurd?
Nope. Nope. None of that.
So, do you see yourself going back to, other DrupalCons, or was this kind of a one and done experience?
I don't think it's a one and done. I would love to go back. I mean, I applied to speak at NARA. I didn't get accepted, but I would love to go to NARA just generally. But yeah, no, absolutely. I definitely would go back to DrupalCon, if they send me.
Yep.
So, Chris, what would it take to sort of win you over to the Drupal side?
Hmm. I oof. I think I think an intuitive user experience that when I log in to the admin, I know exactly where to go to do all the things that I need to do. I don't know what that looks like, and like I said, I feel like Drupal CMS is closer. There's still, you know, things that are kind of opaque. I think that's the biggest thing, is just a lower barrier to entry.
Hmm.
But, like, to that point and, to the earlier point of Experience Builder moving super fast and Drupal CMS moving super fast, you know, a thing that I observed was that, especially after Mr. Mullenweg had said that we're gonna slow down development on WordPress core for a while, is with Drupal moving super fast, I see an opportunity for Drupal to, like, maybe innovate faster than WordPress is, and maybe steal folks over more so than previously, because, like, we're at a flux point, right? And mm, yeah, I'm interested to see what the next 6 to 8 months have to show us.
Yeah. Well, Chris, thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
Love being on, even though I'm a WordPress guy.
Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on the socials with the handle Talking Drupal or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TD promo.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron on talkingdrupal.com and choosing the Become a Patron button. All right, Chris, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'm on Blue Sky at jazzsequence.com. On Blue Sky, I'm on Insta, Jazz Sequence with a 3, JAZZS3QUENCE. Basically, all of my socials, if you go to Jazz Sequence without a 3, .github.io, it has all of my links and stuff there. And I also have a blog at jazzsequence.com.
Perfect. And JD, how about you?
You can find me on Drupal.org. My username is JD Leonard, and it's the same on Drupal Slack.
How about you, Martin?
You can find me as Manclue on all of the Drupal and social channels, or you can read my latest musings at manclue.com.
And you can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
If you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.
See you guys next week.